count.
You can remove your mask when you're at the podium, so you can sit.
Yeah, that's the chairs.
Yeah, those are.
No, it's not what comes in.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. The next item on the agenda is the debate with the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, the EU's role in a changing world and the security situation of Europe following the Russian aggression and invasion of Ukraine. Let me start by saying, dear Prime Minister, dear Kaja, dear colleagues, this session today is devoted to one of the most pressing issues, the EU's changing role in a changing world. Putin's invasion shattered the peace our generation has known. It has changed everything. And Europe's response must be proportionate to the serious, real, and growing threat to our collective security. So we need to reassess the European Union's role in this new world. We need to boost our investment in defence and in innovative technologies. This is the time for us to take decisive steps to ensure the security of all Europeans. The time to build a real security and defence union and reduce our dependencies on the Kremlin. What we have seen so far in terms of European coordination, solidarity and unity is unprecedented, and this must be the blueprint of what we do going forward. Our people and our states have welcomed more than 1.5 million Ukrainians into our communities, our homes and our hearts. We have matched massive sanctions with practical solidarity in a show of European values. And I know we can go further still, and we must all do what we can. We have with us today Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas. Kaja, thank you for accepting our invitation to address the Parliament and the people of Europe as part of our new This is Europe debates, where different EU leaders can be present to discuss our common agenda. We are also so pleased to welcome you back among us now as Prime Minister of Estonia, a member state of the European Union that shares a near 300-kilometre border with Russia. Let me assure you, Prime Minister, that you will find us together in opposing this invasion, in ensuring a clear response to dealing with the Kremlin, and in ensuring that democracy prevails. We stand together for Ukraine. We stand together with Ukraine. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Honourable President Metsola, esteemed members of the Parliament, dear guests. It's an honour and a privilege to be speaking here today. The European Parliament is not only a house of European democracy, it has also been my political base for 4 years. So here I feel at home, I feel among friends. Sadly, our fellow Europeans in Ukraine cannot say the same. They are fighting for their homeland, for their loved ones, their freedom to choose their own destiny. The Ukrainian armed forces are putting up a fierce resistance that President Putin did not expect. Ordinary people are on the streets showing the flag to the invading army, inviting them to go home. Ukrainian farmers have become famous for towing captured tanks back home. One story circulating on social media even speaks of a woman who downed a Russian drone by throwing a jar of pickles at it. Later, she contested that it was a jar of pickled tomatoes. How, asks the commentator, did they expect to occupy this country? At the same time, many others are streaming across borders. Over 2 million have reached safety in the European Union. These refugees will keep coming. In the words of one humanitarian worker, in a conflict, always watch which way the refugees are going. In the current war, they are headed for the European Union, not for Russia. Putin's war is an act of raw military aggression against an independent and sovereign country that wants nothing more than to fulfill its own European dream. The aim is to terrorize civilians. We have seen it before in Grozny, we have seen it in Aleppo. Kindergartens, hospitals, residential buildings are targeted in contravention to the international humanitarian law. You have been doom scrolling on your phones just like I have, so I do not need to tell you of the atrocities taking place now, every day, in places like Kharkiv, Mariupol, as well as Kiev, where many people are without water, electricity, food. Putin's war has also left ordinary Russians without access to the truth. They are living in isolated infospace. We thought that in times of the internet, this could no longer be possible, but it is. Our task is to break the wall of lies. It is a complicated task. We need to mobilize our technological potential to win the war for truth. And it goes without saying that global internet platforms have a huge role to play. If you allow me, Madam President, I would also like to address the Russian people directly. Dear Russian friends, the European Union is not acting against you. Our measures are intended to isolate President Putin and his government, which is conducting a brutal war against Ukraine. You are now seeing only the beginnings of deprivation, which will become much worse as our sanctions kick in. Your government is already instituting practices that are familiar to me from the Soviet times, like censorship, like threatening journalists with the 15-year prison sentences for speaking about the war, like rationing for foodstuffs, like asking teachers to report on the political sympathies of their pupils and their parents. Global companies are pulling out of Russia. Airlines are no longer flying. You can no longer use your Visa and MasterCards. None of this is directed against you. It is directed against President Putin and his government. We understand that it hurts you, but it also hurts us. It hurts you because autocrat does not care for the people. He only cares for his power. That is something that is so hard to understand in a democratic world. Last year's Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Novaya Gazeta editor-in-chief Dmitry Muratov called this a question between, and I quote, people for the state or the state for the people. Dear Russian friends, we continue to hope for a democratic and stable Russia that is respectful of its neighbors and is governed by a rule of law. Madam President, dear members, since the 24th of February, which coincidentally was the 104th anniversary of Estonia's independence, the world has changed. President Putin's invasion of Ukraine has ushered in a period of insecurity on our continent that we have not seen since 1939. And like we saw after the Second World War, our world will not return to the status quo ante. Russia's relationship with the outside world will be different. How to restore the trust in respecting international law and order? European attitudes towards security will be different, and our institutional setups will need to adjust. And we might just have rediscovered what the liberal international rules-based order was all about in the first place. So in short, we will in the future speak about before times and the after times. The free world has already begun to respond, and the European Union has been at the forefront of this response, which itself is a welcome change. The EU is not normally seen to be a particularly nimble organization, but in terms of security, we have changed more in the last couple of weeks than we have in the last 30 years. We have imposed 3 packages of tough sanctions on top of those existing already since Russia's invasion to Donbas and annexation of Crimea in 2014. We have frozen assets, stopped Moscow's access to its reserves held abroad, and thrown Russia out of SWIFT. We have closed our airspace to Russian-registered, owned and operated aircraft. We have shut down disinformation channels masquerading as media outlets. And we have acted to use the European Peace Facility to send €500 million in much-needed defensive weapons and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. The EU has acted with an urgency, conviction and unity that has surprised President Putin and the world. And dare I say, we have also surprised ourselves. We have indeed acted as a geopolitical union. Our citizens have responded as well by opening their pocketbooks and their hearts, by welcoming refugees, often into their own homes, by volunteering on humanitarian missions, by collecting food, clothing and medicines for those fleeing the war. And let's not forget about the Irish fishermen. Our citizens are showing a generosity of spirit that makes me proud to be Estonian and proud to be European. I know a bit about kindness of strangers. As many of you know, I am the child of deportees whom Stalin sent away to Siberia. My mother was just 6 months old when she was deported on a cattle car along with her mother and grandmother to what Estonians call the cold land. It was a stranger who gave my grandmother a jar of milk that kept my mother alive during this journey. It were strangers who dried the baby's diapers on their skin as it was the only warm place in the cattle car. And it were strangers who helped in untold ways when they were allowed to return to Estonia. So you could say we Estonians have some experience in being deported and fleeing wars. And we also have some experience with Russia, which we have been trying to share with the European Union since we joined. It was 78 years ago today when the Red Army bombed my home city, Tallinn, to the ground. But my mother, the same baby who took her first trip abroad to Siberia, always taught me that it was impolite to say, "I told you so." Madam President, dear members, we are in this for the long haul. We will have to exercise strategic patience because peace is not going to break out tomorrow. Russia expects us to make a step back soon. As Dmitry Medvedev explained to Putin in a recent public meeting of the Russian Security Council, and I quote, "Sooner or later, they, the West, will get tired of their own initiative. They will come to ask us about returning to discussions and negotiations regarding all the matters of strategic security." End of quote. Putin will come to test us, and yes, we will have to resist. That means that we need to keep supporting those fighting for Ukraine's independence, while giving time for the sanctions and isolating measures to work to their full capacity. This will require a sustained effort from all of us, but we need also to think about what comes next. I see 2 areas of action. First, we need to hardwire our fundamental change of heart into policy of smart containment. We all want a democratic and secure Russia. This House expressed that desire last year when it honored a Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, with Sakharov Prize. But what I mean by hardwiring is that we need now to consolidate with the free world what the free world has accomplished in the last weeks and build on it. We need to do this together with our trusted transatlantic partners and others who are like-minded. And there are many like-minded partners. If you look last week's UN General Assembly, the vast majority of the world community, 141 states, voted to condemn Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. This vote demonstrates not only a victory of multilateralism, but a win for the rule of law. We also need collectively to give our strongest support to the International Criminal Court once the time comes. Last week, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan announced that 39 state parties to the Rome Statute had referred the situation to his office. This enables him to go ahead with the investigation in any past and present war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide committed on any part of the territory of Ukraine by any person. Here in the European Union, we need to push harder and faster to cut our energy dependence on Russian gas and oil. Because we have already committed to the green transition, this will be a win-win for our energy independence, but also good for the planet. We also need to move quickly to synchronize Ukraine's power grid with that of continental Europe and make sure all parts of the EU are synchronized into that continental grid as well. Turning to defense, our decisions of last week to use the European Peace Facility to assist Ukraine are but the first step towards strengthening our own continental security. We must transform our deterrent posture into a defense plan. I'm mindful that not all European members are NATO allies. When my father was leading the Estonian negotiations to join NATO, he was often asked, "Why do you need this? Russia does not pose a threat anymore." Well, we knew our neighbor then, and we also know our neighbor now. I can only be grateful to the decision to join the Defence Alliance, but being part of the alliance also comes with the obligations. The 2% of the GDP defence spending target must become an absolute minimum requirement. Estonia decided this already 10 years ago. And allow me here to thank Germany for having taken the previously unimaginable decision of raising its defence spending to 2%. All of Europe thanks you. Let me say here clearly that as we strengthen European defence, we need to work hand in hand with NATO. Time after time, we have agreed that stronger Europe means stronger NATO, just as stronger NATO implies a stronger European defence. I look forward to a third joint declaration between the EU and NATO on the matter. A stronger European defence means planning our spending wisely and in coordination. We must concentrate on those capabilities that are too expensive for any individual member state to develop on their own, such as longer air defence, including missile defence. Our European capabilities need to be mobile so we can move them quickly if we need to, and they need to be state-of-the-art. Russia may have an enormous military force, but we can compete with quality, breakthrough technology. I urge all member states to submit only PESCO projects that bring technological innovation to the table. And here is a sobering thought. In stepping up European defence, we must find a consensus within the EU that sometimes the best way of achieving peace is the willingness to use military strength. These are my thoughts on the need of policy of smart containment. Let me now turn to the second area where we should concentrate as we think of the post-war order. And this is the future of Ukraine. Madam President, dear members, Ukraine came under attack in 2014 because it wanted to join the European Union. It came under armed attack on the 24th of February because it seeks to take its rightful place among us. It is in our interest that Ukraine becomes more stable, more prosperous, and solidly founded on the rule of law. I know from Estonia's own experience that this is how it works. But it's not only in our interest to give Ukraine a membership perspective, it is also our moral duty to do so. Ukraine is not fighting for Ukraine, it's also fighting for Europe. If not now, then when? I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Prime Minister, I give the floor now to the High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell.
Madame la Présidente du Parlement européen,
Madam President,
Ms. Kallas, members of the European Parliament, thank you to the Prime Minister of Estonia, Ms. Kallas, for setting so clearly what is at stake. Her presentation has been so complete that I'm afraid it will be difficult for me not to repeat what you have already said. I will try. I will try not to repeat what the Prime Minister has said and you already know. And I want to bring to this House a double message. First, we have done a lot. Second, we have done enough. First, we have done a lot, breaking taboos and advancing in something that was unthinkable some days or hours before. But certainly it's not enough, and we should have done it quicker. So let's be self-praising, but at the same time, let's be self-critical, because the challenges that we are facing will require a strong stance from our side, and will require to be ready to pay a price. To pay a price because the consequences of the war will be long-lasting, and the consequences of this war will be shaping the European policies for the years and for the decades to come. We are going to face the problem of gas supply, refugees, changing, above all, what do we understand by security and defense policy of the European Union, and the fragmentation of the world economy that will certainly result from the weaponization of interdependency, which is no longer something to be discussed on academic circles, is not an abstract concept, is a reality. Weaponization of interdependency. And certainly we are dependent of Russian gas, and the first thing to do is to cancel this dependency. Dear members of the European Parliament, when the phone rang at 5 o'clock in the morning 2 weeks ago, and my head of cabinet voice told me they have started bombing Kiev, I felt the page of history turning. And I felt that we were entering in a new era, in a new moment of the history, in an occasion in which we Europeans, we should be able to really face the challenge that Russia is putting to us. And in order not to repeat what Ms. Prime Minister has already said, allow me to make some evaluations about, in general terms, what's going on this new era of our history. The first one is that the fact that we Europeans don't like war doesn't allow us not to think about war. Si nous, les Européens, on n'aime pas la guerre, on en a fait trop.
We Europeans, we do not like war, but we have waged war amongst each other. It has left us with a bitter taste. Now we no longer want to wage war, but that doesn't mean other people don't want to. You need multiple sides to come to peace, but only one side to wage war. And now we are facing this war because Putin has a certain vision of a history that is completely different to ours. His way of thinking is completely different to us, and that is why he has done what he has done. That is why we need to face this, knowing that he is mistaken. Putin believed that Ukraine was weak and servile, but he has met a strong and resistant country. He felt that Europe was too weakened and divided and too dependent on its gas to show a united front. He felt that the United States were too concerned with China to look to what was happening in Europe. He thought that the division between Europe and the US was sufficiently wide, so we would not unite as we have done. He thought his army would be capable of crushing Ukraine in just a few days, in occupying Kiev and putting in place a puppet government. But all of this has not come to pass. This war will continue, and we will have to deal with the circumstances as they come. One of the considerations we have to look at is our economic global interdependence, but that does not change the relations and powers of force. Our trade relations are a good way to build a peaceful world, but it is not sufficient. It is not sufficient when faced with people who do not share our values of liberal democracy. I believe Lenin said, when speaking of capitalists, they would be willing to sell almost anything if it brought them benefits to themselves. And he believed, Putin, that the Russians would be sufficiently strong that we would back down in the face of war in Ukraine. He believed our energy ties with Russia would paralyze us. Now, it's true, we are affected by our energy ties. When it comes to oil and gas, we are paying the equivalent of the amount of assets that have been frozen, owned by the Russian central bank. So we have blocked these reserves, but we haven't stopped the flows. Now, obviously, these reserves are an accumulation of these flows. Now, he put aside certain currency reserves in dollars and euros to put them into Chinese currency, for example, currencies that were outside of our control. So the first thing that we need to do is to cut the umbilical cord that links us with the Russian economy. We need to stop these flows that allow them to gain assets to finance this war.
Y eso lo podemos hacer al
This is something that we can do at a macro political level, as the Commission did yesterday with a new directive that means that by the end of the year we will have cut our dependence on Russian energy by 2/3. It is a difficult objective, but something which is achievable if we really put our minds to it. And this requires macroeconomic measures, technical measures. It also means that European citizens need to turn the heat down in their houses. Everybody needs to make an individual effort when it comes to cutting use of gas, the same way we would use less water if there was a drought, and the same way we all work together to wear masks to tackle COVID. The communal efforts we made in the face...
Compromiso colectivo para hacer frente a una tarea que es sin duda histórica.
We need to make a collective commitment. We started too late, but it is better late than never. When we saw the invasion in Crimea, we knew we had to reduce our dependence on Russian energy, but actually we only increased it instead of decreasing it. And now it is high time that systematically, permanently, consistently, we reduce our dependence on Russian oil and gas. Defending our liberal values will not be possible unless there is a political commitment and citizens willing to pay a price for this. It would simply be a chimera. It would be empty words unless we are willing to act, to be more united, to be more coordinated, and to pay the inevitable price that any kind of structural change will bring, such as changing the energy mix of an entire continent. We also need to tackle the narrative. I was speaking to people from the Middle East, from China. People believe that we, Westerners or those in Ukraine, started the war, that we were using nuclear threats, that the fault was on our side, starting this Third World War, as they called it. So it's very important to tackle that way of thinking. And we also need to develop our own facts. We need to get the information across. I think there's a huge amount of diplomatic work to be done. We have to speak loudly from the side of Europe to explain what is really happening. Not everybody has the same clear vision of what is happening in Ukraine. We have false messages, propaganda, lies, which can contaminate the minds of those who do not have any further information than that. So it is our information to provide those facts, that truth of what is happening on the ground. It's important also to separate the regime of Putin from the Russian people. Now, we have called this war Putin's war, and it is his war. He is the one that decided to wage this war. And I think it's important that we make a distinction between one person supported by a regime, supported by oligarchs, based on corruption, on exploiting the wealth of a country, and on the other hand, the Russian people who have come out on the streets to protest against the war. Thousands of citizens who have been imprisoned because they protested in Russia. They deserve our solidarity and support, as do the citizens of Ukraine. This conflict will last. It will be like COVID. It's not just going to disappear overnight. It is going to leave a mark on history. The way this war develops will develop on a number of factors that we don't necessarily control. The balance of military power on the ground, I think it's important, therefore, that we provide military support to the people and to the army of Ukraine. Secondly, the consequences of the sanctions that we have applied against Russia, the financial and economic sanctions. The Russian economy is not that interlinked with the global economy. It is basically pumping out gas, and it uses money from these energy transactions to fund its military, to expand its influence where it can, to the Caucasus, now to Ukraine. So it will depend what effect these sanctions have. It seems Russia is now risking default on some of its external debt. The fall of the ruble has been very striking. It shows the weakening of the economy, but unfortunately this will also have an impact on the people. Unfortunately, though, these sanctions will not show effect in the next few days. It's something that will take place over the longer term. We need to continue increasing pressure through the options that we have. Member states are working on a new package of sanctions. It involves around 100 people responsible at different levels of government, more economic sanctions. I hope that these will be adopted before the end of this session today.
Va a depender de la movilización.
It also depends on the international mobilization against the war. We should be proud of the extraordinary diplomatic solidarity. 141 countries supported Ukraine and only 4 supported Russia. We have North Korea, Belarus, and Eritrea. So there were also a lot of companies which abstained. There were abstentions in Africa. It's important to understand this in the context of what is happening in the world. We need to strengthen our ties with countries that, for one reason or another, through fear of Russia perhaps, those who are concerned about showing an independence of thought and action, rather than condemn Russia, they chose to abstain or not participate in the vote. North and South America has been very united when it comes to condemning Russia. Africa, not so much. From a geopolitical point of view, we really need to focus on links to African countries so that we can be united when we come to a critical moment such as this one. Putin tried to invade the cities rapidly. He wanted to take Kyiv in just a week, but Kyiv is still resisting. All of the Ukrainian cities are resisting. The Russian army is doing the only thing it knows how to do in response: bombing. It did this in Aleppo, across all of Syria, in Chechnya, and it will do the same now in Ukraine, without any concern for the civilian casualties. There are humanitarian corridors being opened, but on the condition that they lead to Russia, and then bombing people when they try to use these humanitarian corridors. And we condemn this in the strongest possible terms. Now, there is more diplomatic work that needs to be done. We have condemned this strongly, but we also need to continue working to try and achieve a ceasefire, to have peace talks between Ukraine and Russia under the auspices of the United Nations. We need to rethink what we want to do here. When we will activate the articles of the treaty that promise that Europe will build a common defense system, not in parallel to NATO, but a complement to NATO. We need more commitment, more political will. We need to increase our security, our defense. Let me say, I think it's very good that Germany has taken the first step along this path. Nobody likes to say to their citizens that they're increasing their military efforts. We all prefer a carrot rather than a stick approach. But when the Helsinki agreements were signed, we saw around a 4% spending on defense of GDP on average. And now we have 1.5% of GDP spent on defense. So from 4% to 1.5% during a period of 50 years of peace. Now, that could be justified when the dividends of peace were used to improve social security, for example, well-being. But now, when we look at the challenges that we are facing, it would be to ignore reality if we did not do the necessary awareness raising and explain to our citizens that our way of life does come with a cost. We want to have everything organized very neatly, like a formal French garden, but out there the jungle is growing, and if we don't want the jungle to invade our neatly manicured lawns and garden, we need to do more than just maintain it. We need to defend it. From Gibraltar all the way to the Caucasus, we are surrounded by a ring of fire, including, amongst others, Russia. If we look at the Caucasus, if we look at Syria, if we look at the Sahel, Europeans need to understand that these bombs falling on Kiev, that is a wake-up call from our dream of well-being and prosperity. We have to face these challenges. We did not look for these challenges, but these are the ones that we face now, and Ukraine is our number one priority. Please use less gas. Reduce our dependence on Russia as they attack Ukraine. Make more commitment to our collective defense. That is an obligation under the treaties, and I think we have not paid sufficient attention to that up to now. Thank you.
I now pass to the speakers on behalf of the political group, starting with the EPP group, Arnaud Danjean.
Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representative, for 30 years now, since the Yugoslav war, we've had an opportunity for Europe to reawaken. But when it comes to defense, progress has never lived up to the public statements. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is the start of a new era, and Europe has to draw the necessary consequences. What does this mean in practice? Well, finally, we need the European strategic compass. We have instruments at our disposal that just need to be used. What we have lacked are not tools and instruments. No, what we've lacked is a unanimous, simultaneous political will from our member states. We depend entirely on the terms of the Lisbon Treaty, Articles 47, Article 44, etc., but these have never been activated. We understand the importance of these budget lines, but we have never been able to actually stock them up properly. What about intervention forces? We've had the famous battle groups in place for 20 years now. We know what we lack. All of our technical shortcomings have been identified, and they are clearly labelled in the European Parliament reports every single year. We have a European defence industry that it performs well and is capable of rising to the challenge. Please, could we please not have these industries subject to the taxonomy regulations Commission, we're talking to you here. Important announcements have been made by European leaders recently, but Europe's credibility depends on the long term. We need irreversible political will. The worst thing I can imagine is coming back here in a couple of months' time, understanding that our efforts had been relaxed.
And now, on behalf of the S&D Group, I invite Irache Garcia Perez to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister, Ms. Kallas, welcome to the European Parliament where you belong. The criminal attack by Putin has held up a mirror to us of our own strengths and weaknesses as a European Union. The wavering that we have traditionally shown towards the Kremlin contrasts with the forceful measures that have been taken since the outbreak of the war, in particular the agreement on economic sanctions and the change in our asylum policy, which is a contrast to the shameful closure of borders against the Syrians in 2015. In a few days, we have taken a gigantic step along the path to becoming a global power. Once again, we have proof that the European Union is forged under the impact of crises, and the time has now come to take critical stock of ourselves, to learn from our mistakes. Never again should we sacrifice human rights for gas. It is necessary to create strategic reserves of gas, to jointly purchase it and connect the Iberian Peninsula to make it a centre of storage, regasification, distribution of liquid national gas. This is imperative and urgent. Imposing levies on electricity companies who do not invest in renewables is also an imperative necessity, because every euro that we invest in green energy reduces our strategic vulnerability. We also need a roadmap to correct the mistakes that we made in the refugee crisis of 2015. We need to activate the directive on temporary protection, which obliges member states to provide shelter, food, education, health and work to refugees. So now we have to agree on a fair distribution of refugees and establish a proper mechanism for reception. This is an opportunity to design a new migration policy which is based this time on responsibility and solidarity. We also have to prepare to support the Ukrainian population. We never wanted a war. Putin is the sole responsible for this. Today, the weapons which are helping a free Ukraine to survive are the very weapons that the Second Spanish Republic did not have 80 years ago because of the failure of European democracies to act. In this tragic moment for the Ukrainian army, we have to supply weapons to help them defend innocent men, women and children. Their safety is our safety, because nobody in Europe is going to be safe if Putin has his way. The killing of civilians violates the rules of war laid down in the Geneva Conventions, and it is a matter of urgency for the United Nations to organize humanitarian corridors, and the International Criminal Court has to move ahead in investigating Putin as a war criminal. In its mediating role, China must set aside its ambiguity and offer tangible action to guarantee peace. The solution to the cowardly aggression of Putin cannot be the surrender of Ukraine or the amputation of any of its territory. Any concession to Putin, we have to say loud and clear to Putin that any democratic European state has the right to become a member of the European Union, including Ukraine. It is now time for us to express our absolute support to the Baltic countries and all countries who have borders with Ukraine and Russia. We have seen for ourselves, I have seen for myself, the strength of solidarity on the border between Ukraine and Hungary, the admirable work of the Red Cross and those unsung volunteers who are providing the immediate needs, covering the immediate needs of refugees arriving at our borders. We have to use this solidarity shown by our citizens to give us a stronger sense of European identity and move forward in fighting against tyrants like Putin. The time has come that we should stop asking ourselves what the European Union can do for us, but what we can do for the European Union.
Nathalie Loiseau.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Première.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representative. War has come back to haunt Europe. Death is knocking at our door, and we need to live up to the challenges. Despite our efforts and the heroism of the Ukrainian people, we have not been able to stop the war, and we still cannot stop it. We have done a lot in very little time. We have put in place sanctions against the Russian regime. We have tried to stop propaganda from the Russian government, and we have delivered weapons to Ukraine. But we see that this is not enough. We need to do more to defend the Ukrainian people and to defend ourselves. We need to use less oil and Russian gas. We need to provide more weapons to Ukraine, not to prolong the conflict, but so that it can protect its civilians who are being bombed by the Russians. We also need to help Moldova, which is taking in many, many refugees, and they're very concerned that they will be Putin's next target. We need to protect ourselves by making significant efforts to improve our defense spending. Germany is increasing its military budget. Good. It was high time. Denmark wants to join a Europe of defense. Also good, but there's still a lot to be done. Military mobility has not made enough progress. Our critical infrastructures are not yet sufficiently protected. We need to strengthen the solidarity amongst European countries. I welcome the reinforcement of NATO's presence to the east, but we also need to look to those countries that are not part of the Atlantic Alliance yet. I'm thinking particularly of Sweden and Finland here. Europe is going to adopt its strategic compass, so let us not hesitate. Let us make every effort possible to build a European Union of defence. It will not come too soon. We have spoke of this for a long, long time, and hopefully it will not be too late now.
Next, on behalf of the Greens, Kaja Kallas.
Thank you, President, Prime Minister. The war Putin is waging is targeted against Ukraine, shelling civilian areas and attacking refugees. But his war is also meant against Europe as a whole. Putin intends to destroy the post-Cold War European security architecture. Putin is waging a war against democracy, rule of law and freedoms, which are universal values. As European Union, as union built for peace, we must act for the European security. At European level, we need to make sure that the member states' defence is functioning, that investments are compatible with one another, that pooling and sharing finally gets implemented, and that we have common standards so equipment cannot be used by one state alone. But colleagues, if we are exclusively thinking about the army when saying defence and security, then we don't see the whole picture. Security means much more. It means energy security and energy independence. We need to get rid of the dependence on Russia's fossil fuels and raw materials, be it gas, oil, coal or uranium. We have plenty of sun and wind to use on our own. We have the technology at hand. We need to reduce our consumption and speed up Fit for 55, investing massively in renewables, in energy efficiency and in energy saving. Security also means civil protection. In the last years and decades, much of the protective infrastructure in Europe has been neglected. Floods and wildfires in the recent years have already shown us the lack of preparedness. The EU and its member states need to urgently work on how to effectively protect citizens. Security also means to make sure that Europe's critical infrastructure is well functioning, well stocked and in public hands. The same goes for the cybersecurity and our digital infrastructure and data. We need to talk about resilient societies, about communities that help each other and are educated to withstand misinformation campaigns and to spot fake news. And security for Europe means solidarity among member states, about sharing the efforts, for example, for welcoming the many people fleeing Ukraine. They need to be housed, they need medical care, the children need to go to school. And that will need a shared effort by all member states and not just a few. We have seen it in the last 2 weeks. When we act together, we are strong. This is the lesson that we have to carry forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Keller. I give the floor next to Jack Madison on behalf of the ID Group.
Thank you so much, Mrs. President, austatud proua Kallas.
Mrs. Kallas, Mr. Borrell, I start in English. Now I continue in English.
Way that if I listen our good colleagues from the Socialist Group and from the Renew Group, if they are calling for more military help to Ukraine, that's exactly what we have to do. I've heard some kind of arguments that if we help in a military way Ukraine, then the war will be bigger, it will be more chaos, it will be a disaster in the world, it will be a third world war. But no, the sooner we end the war in Ukraine, the sooner Russia will be back in their own territory, and the sooner those refugees who are really refugees today, women and children, are escaping from war zone to the neighborhood countries, the sooner they can go back to their homes. I just read yesterday that our good colleagues from Poland, they are ready to help Ukraine with the fighter jets. That's what we have to do. And unfortunately, when I was reading our good colleagues from the US, now they are scared. They are not ready to really move those fighter jets through NATO bases to Ukraine. But every day, the Russians are just killing the ordinary people. They are killing the children. They are attacking hospitals. They're attacking like ordinary houses. And every day, what we are waiting with the help, the more the disaster will be. And if they will succeed, Russians in Ukraine, there's the question, who's next? We have seen in the last 3 months, they're ambitious. We have seen what they have told. And their dream is to go back to the Soviet Union time. And unfortunately, well, I'm, and also Ms. Kallas are from the country who's very close to Russia. And it's very easy to close Baltic states from the Western world. And that's why we have to stop the war as soon as possible and harmfully against Russians. Also, I would like to mention that we have to understand that there has been huge support from the Russian population to Putin. Look at 2014, after the Crimean annexion. There was a huge support to go to Crimea and to occupy it. So that's why I wouldn't say that there is totally different parts of Russia, that there is Putin and Kremlin and there is ordinary people. That large part of the Russians are unfortunately still supporting this aggressor. Lõpetuseks eesti keeles.
And I would like to conclude in Estonian. I'm addressing myself to Mrs. Kallas because I don't meet her very often. NATO is an important ally for us, so there's no doubt about that. But in order for the allies to be able to defend us, we must do our bit as well. Political consensus in Estonia is that we must invest as quickly as possible into national defense. We have to take a loan to do that. At the moment, we have the lowest foreign debt in the EU. At the moment, there is war going on in our neighboring country. We must take this loan, but there is only one Estonian political party that is against it, and this is the Reform Party, your own party. You say that it will threaten the balance of the budget. Today, we shouldn't speak about the balance of the budget. We should speak about investing in our defense capabilities. All other parties agree, even Social Democrats. Let's defend Ukraine, let's defend Europe, but also Estonia.
President, Madam Prime Minister, High Rep Vice President. We used to call the Soviet Union the empire of evil and the prison of nations. Now, looking, listening to news, after bloody, awful, full-scale, cruel aggression of Russian Federation on Ukraine, we feel unbearable déjà vu, once more willing to call it like this. Ukrainian fight what we call bellum justum, a war that is just, because with arms in their hands, they defend their territory, whole territory, internationally recognized territory. They defend their families, innocent civilians, against an enemy, against war crimes, against crimes against humanity, because we see traces of this, not only traces, actually already many documented cases. Unfortunately, future security of our continent and probably global security very much depends on the result of this war. And therefore, we have to do our utmost to stop it. How to respond proportionately, Madam President, to killings of innocent children, 18 months old, and how to use strategic patience when we have this kind of results. The only way I see is after surrender of Russian Federation, full rejections of neo-imperialist ambitions of will, and that is not only Putin, that's sure. The will to stay aggressive vis-à-vis neighbors and much more beyond. We have to work to this end. Thank you.
Next is Martin Schurdewan on behalf of the Left Group.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Welcome, Madam Prime Minister. The attack on Ukraine in violation of international law has shocked and dismayed many people in Europe and in the world. They were afraid that this war could spread and escalate to a conflict between nuclear powers. We have to do everything in our power to stop this happening and to ensure that this war in the heart of Europe is ended without delay. The peace in Europe is destroyed by every grenade, by every air raid, by every bullet that is fired, and our global security architecture is shaken to the core. Vladimir Putin is responsible, fully responsible for this, without any ifs or buts. And I have to say that this cowardly attack against Ukraine has called into question my own political views and obliges me to look for new answers. But where there can be no doubt, but just one unambiguous response, is as to our solidarity and our empathy with the Ukrainian population who are living through an appalling tragedy. And my thoughts are also with those courageous Russian citizens who are not only opposed to the war, but who are putting themselves in great personal danger in order to demonstrate against the increasingly dictatorial rule of Putin. Effective sanctions are necessary against Putin and his oligarchs. Only if you hit the apparatus of power around Putin will you be able to weaken his power base. So let's confiscate those yachts and villas. Let's track down that dirty money and make them available for humanitarian aid and to rebuild the destroyed cities in Ukraine. But for these targeted sanctions to really hit home, there has to be an end to the possibility of oligarchs parking their wealth in EU tax havens. We need strong tax transparency, property registers, and a strict regulation of cryptocurrencies. In the long term, the EU will only be able to play a credible role in the global security architecture if it can supply its own energy needs, and renewable energy has to be extended and built up. We also need a sustainable food sovereignty. We need our own autonomy and public control for critical infrastructure like the semiconductor industry, for the health sector, and also for public services. Ladies and gentlemen, there will come a day when this terrible war is over. And although many certainties are being called into question these days, one conviction remains intact, and that is that the world will not be a safer place through more armament and more military use of military force. If we want to offer our children a peaceful future, we have to take concrete steps to disarm and to strengthen international organizations, to put an end to weapons of mass destruction. And we will have to work on a security architecture that is based on international law and that allows for conflicts to be resolved peacefully through diplomacy. Thank you.
Floor next on behalf of the non-attached members to Kinga Gál.
Ország katonai agressziója. Európa közös érdeke, hogy Ukrajnában mielőbb.
We are faced with Russia's aggression against the Ukraine. This is a big challenge. We understand that NATO does not want to become directly involved in this war. We need strategic calm. We need to avoid any steps that would bring our country, Hungary, into danger. We see war coming to our borders. We are showing a lot of solidarity from our side to the Ukrainians. This is the most aid Hungary has ever provided. We do not accept the criticism that has been leveled at Hungary, saying that we have not shown solidarity.
Colleagues, the security situation in Europe today depends on one thing, and one thing only: whether we stay strong and united and defeat the 21st century Hitler and Stalin in one, called Putin. Whether we defeat him is up to us. Yesterday, a Ukrainian writer, Oksana Zabushko, said, "Ukrainians are not afraid of Russia. The Ukrainians will defend their land." What about us? Is the European Union afraid of Russia? Are we afraid of high costs? All of us, we have to say no. Now the key questions for ourselves are: first, full military assistance to the Ukrainians currently defending Europe. Second, full containment of the Putin regime and Russia to the point of total embargo. Third, sanctions until the very end, until the last occupier leaves the Ukrainian soil, all of its territory. Fourth, a special procedure for Ukraine's EU candidate status now. Ukraine signed its membership application in blood. I call on the Council not to be afraid of Russia and of this challenge to ourselves. Ukraine needs political protection. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you. Next is Pedro Marques.
Thank you very much, President, Prime Minister, High Representative. Colleagues, the war has brought us atrocities that infiltrate our own lives through our economy. It's the fuels in our cars, the meat on our tables. But let's not allow the economic consequences to weaken our resolve. That would be a failure of solidarity and that we could never pardon ourselves. Now it's a question of a fight for freedom. The freedom of Ukrainians today may be our own tomorrow. So it's important that the EU should act rapidly before this war turns into a deep crisis. So we need rapid action. And it's not just a question of next generation EU, because that money is required to fulfill the investment gap in the EU. We need a next generation EU 2.0. We need to show that same level of ambition that we showed in combating COVID, because this puts the Union in jeopardy.
Madam Chair, dear Kaja, High Representative, dear colleagues. Putin's plan to steadily expand aggressive Ruski Mir has turned into a brutal war against Ukraine, a human tragedy, and become a litmus test for the EU and the West in general. Let us recognize that Ukraine is a welcome candidate to our family. Let us help to repel aggressor and give us all support they need. Let us provide a safe haven for Ukrainian women, children, and elderly people who are forced to flee. We have no right to let Srebrenica happen again. We must do everything possible to return the sky over Ukraine to a peaceful blue and to make the evacuation of civilians safe. Let us create an EU civilian force that can ensure the safety of evacuation at short notice. Colleagues, no-fly zone, no Europe zone. The European Union's response to the aggression against Ukraine must be based on a principle: collective victory or collective failure. And I believe only the latter is not a choice. Long live European Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Next is Jordi Soler.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Prime Minister, Senor Representant. Jean Monnet was definitely right when he wrote in his memoirs, Europe will be forged in crisis. The EU's response to the terrible crisis provoked by Putin's invasion of Ukraine has been swift, united, and strong. It's an answer that lives up to the seriousness of the moment, the worst security crisis in Europe since the end of the Second World War. And it has allowed us, EU citizens, to feel convinced that by helping Ukraine in almost every way we can, we are defending as well the pillars of our common European house. Whether this determination will lead the EU to become finally a geopolitical player, this is still to be seen. We have progressed a lot in just a few days, it's true, but there is still much more to be done, much more convergence in foreign and security policy to be achieved. What is for sure is that the EU's response has been one of the many miscalculations of Putin. He expected the usual disunity and vague diplomatic jargon, but he has got instead unprecedented sanctions for his regime and unprecedented solidarity with Ukraine. It is now of utmost importance that the EU's unity and solidarity holds in the event of a prolonged war, and even when the economic reverberations of the war start hitting our economies. Our unity will be key to make Putin end his bloody war. And while decisive progress in shaping our own security and defense is to be expected in the months to come, we must not forget or relinquish the role that real diplomacy will have to regain at some point in this painful conflict.
Thank you.
The sooner, the better. We will also have to be ready to play a key role in that.
Thank you very much. Next is Mara Bizzotto.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The war in Ukraine is a dramatic act of madness. Putin's military operation against the Ukraine, it has to be stopped absolutely and as soon as possible, using the arms of diplomacy to re-establish peace. This is a dirty war that is causing death and destruction among the civilian population, and it threatens to destabilize the whole world. The war in Ukraine is one that affects all of us, because it is an attack on the values of the whole of the free West. Putin's threat is a threat to peace around the world, to our security, and we cannot pretend that nothing is happening here. With every means available to us, we have to defend our freedom and our democracy. This has to be our mission when faced with a global threat which is arriving from dictatorships and regimes like Communist China, Islamic dictatorships, or Putin's Russia. To rise to this challenge, we must be united. We have to have a strong alliance with the United States of America. It's time for us to reinforce the Atlantic Alliance. We need to build a solid alliance with Israel. It's high time that we created a special relationship with Great Britain and the countries of the Anglosphere. They are important to our common security and defence policy. Europe has to accept its share of the guilt for ambiguity in the past. Colleagues, the war in Ukraine is a historical crossroads where on one hand you have Western democracy and freedom, and on the other you have dictatorship and violence. We stand side by side with the Ukrainian people. We need to ensure that peace puts an end to these bombs, and let's hope that liberty will prevail over dictatorship.
Czarnecki.
Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representative, sanctions, real sanctions, yes, but without exceptions. Russia is exporting arms and natural resources. And if we impose sanctions with exceptions, then it's going to be a gift to Putin, and it's going to be feigned solidarity. Tomorrow there will be talks between Ukraine and Russia in Turkey. We could not influence those talks. Perhaps we could influence more UN talks, if any. Nice metaphor on the European garden and the jungle outside. But in this beautiful garden, we didn't always have solidarity. Some countries next to the jungle were attacked. So I would expect that you promise there will be no attacks on countries that are next to the jungle. I also hope that Finland will take the right decision on NATO. Now, one very important thing, common NATO efforts and no individual.
Is next for 1.5 minutes.
Arvoisa rouva puhemies.
Madam President, Prime Minister, we have to condemn war started by Russia. It's a dirty war against an innocent country, and civilians suffer the most. We have to be prepared to take refugees from Ukraine. We have to make sure that sanctions remain in place and be united and strong. Many member countries think about new strategies in the new security situation. As Ukraine, all sovereign states have their right to take their sovereign decisions independently in terms of security policy. They have to be taken independently without any pressure, and their aim always has to be peace. We have to fight for peace, we have to provide humanitarian support, and at the same time we have to get rid of Russian oil and gas. This is necessary not only for security but also for environment and economy. Commission's report yesterday was a good start, but we can do more. We have to launch green investments in order to make sure that green transition will take place soon. We need new strategies for warming up houses and using renewable energy sources. We need new investments in Europe. They also create jobs. We have to launch them immediately. If this requires new funding mechanisms, we have to be prepared for that. Thank you.
Donato, for 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President, Prime Minister, High Representative. The choice of arming Ukraine and disproportionately worsening the sanctions against Russia are going to have an excessive impact. I think that there will inevitably be consequences for the European economy. European companies are paying for the short-sighted policies decided upon by the Commission, and the price is high. Prices of commodities are going very high, and the impact is being felt on consumer prices as well. We're now in a situation where thousands of companies could go bankrupt, poverty could increase, social tensions could worsen. This is not going to be the impact on Russia, this is going to be the impact on Europe. This disaster cannot simply be blamed on Putin because it's caused by mistaken choices by European governments. If we try and solve this with more arms, more sanctions, etc., well, it's easy to be heroic with other people's lives. We need to ensure that our defense and security is promoted genuinely. Well, is the objective, though, to create a European army financed by European taxpayers? No.
Sehr verehrte Frau Präsidentin, meine sehr geehrten Damen und
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the barbaric attack against Ukraine, as many previous speakers have said, is a decisive moment. We have seen how the world has changed over the last decade, since the 90s. Now we as Europeans need to learn to fight again for our values. We need to preserve our security, our freedom, and so if we want to preserve these, we need a reality check. We need a new focus for our foreign and defense policy. We need to make this policy more effective. The European Parliament, with a large majority for years, has made proposals, has debated this. There were 2 reports recently adopted here in Strasbourg. So let us finally take tangible measures to move forward to a European Union of defence, working closely with our NATO partners. Thank you very much.
Next is Marek Belka.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
President, Prime Minister, High Representative. How many children will your war take? Okean Elzy is an Ukrainian band singing this song. Well, war has come back to Europe. It's knocking on our doors. Sanctions and help have shown the EU as a strong bloc which will not only stand by and look at the conflict at its borders. Our sanctions throw away Russia from the community of nations. We need more sanctions that will devastate the Russian economy. These sanctions must hurt. They must hurt Putin, the oligarchs, but also, unfortunately, the citizens of Russia. Why? Because social tension and revolution in Russia can prevent further crimes. Will these sanctions hurt us as well? Yes. We hope that the Commission will present a strategy to contain the consequences of these sanctions, but this is a price to pay for the defense of our values. We have to make sure that there are no tears on the faces of the Ukrainians and the Europeans. Thank you.
Erst 2 Wochen ist es her, dass wir. It was just 2 weeks ago when we woke up to war in the heart of Europe. Russia has wrenched peace out of place. For 2 weeks now, Ukraine has been resisting heroically, and it's population has been suffering the horrors of war. Europe has shown that it can act quickly and with determination, and that is a ray of hope. And Putin didn't expect that level of resolve. But now, colleagues, we have to show stamina for the long term. We shouldn't budge an inch before Putin, and we have to support Ukraine in the long term, economically, with humanitarian aid and with weapons. We have to meticulously implement the sanctions we've decided, close any loopholes, and we have to use any possibility of ending our dependence on Russian energy. Not one single euro should go into Putin's war chest. We have to turn off the money supply. Europe has to assert itself as a bastion of law and freedom. We have to build up our capabilities militarily in full complementarity with NATO, economically with a view to building the resilience of our economy, and politically by defending together freedom, democracy and the rule of law. And with regard to China, we must show unity. Peking has to decide whether it wishes to be a partner or an opponent of the free world. There is still time for China to act as a peace broker and to be on the right side of history.
Come on.
Dear Prime Minister, High Representative, President, the world that was is no more. It changed irreversible when Putin's troops crossed the Ukrainian border and started killing civilians. Putin did exactly what some of us have been warning you about for years. Yet I don't feel pleasure for saying I told you so. It's no time for pointing fingers. It's time to stand up for Ukraine and bolster our security. Putin's bloody war has shaken us to the core. Now we need to protect our democracy and our union by all means. Many things we considered unthinkable happened. Nord Stream 2 is stopped. Russia is partly cut off from SWIFT. EU's member states' defense budget increased significantly. This means that we can act and adapt and face off danger. Regardless of how Russian invasion ends, Putin has already lost this war. He turned his country into a pariah state and destroyed its economy. Modern Russia is not the military superpower as claimed by Putin. Its imperial ambitions will be forever buried under Ukrainian Rasputita. It is not a war only against Ukraine. This is Putin's war against the civilized world. Ukraine on the front line is defending us and every democracy. We cannot let Ukraine fall. We need to support our fellow Europeans with all resources they require in their defense war. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor next to Harald Wilimski.
Herzlichen Dank, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're saber rattling far too much when I listen to the previous speakers. What the Russian regime and Putin have done is, of course, to be condemned. War is never a solution, but the way that we react here in Parliament, I think, is simply pouring fuel onto the fire. It is not the correct way forward. Let me just give you some examples. Involving NATO further is simply a sign that we don't want peace. We are escalating the situation. Having Ukraine on a fast track to join the EU, that's also the wrong direction forward. How many more European criteria are you just going to throw overboard? Schengen, Maastricht, the Copenhagen criteria. None of this seems to mean anything anymore when we look at the European framework. And thirdly, this issue of sanctions. It's not the von der Leyens or the Bidens. It is the people who are suffering, who now have to pay such high prices at the petrol pump. We need to escalate. We need to choose the right way forward to Ukraine.
Bertrand Jan Rausen. Mr. Wilimski, you no longer have the floor. Bertrand Rausen, you have the floor next.
Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representative, the war in Ukraine has brought us brutally face to face with the facts. War in Europe? That was all in the past. Investing in defence? There was no need for all that, thought a great many people. Now we know better. We need to change course, that much is clear. No, not by creating new European command structures, let alone a European army, but through increasing military cooperation and coordination between member states. For our defence, we already have an excellent system for cooperation, and that is the NATO alliance. Let us invest in that and cherish that. And it's now up to European member states to shoulder responsibility. We need more money, a great deal more money. Finally, Germany has woken up with its injection of 100 billion in its defence. But what about the rest? There is a reason why NATO recommends 2% of GNP going into defence. Russia is a big danger to world peace. That's what we have to arm ourselves against.
Ivan Vilibor Sinčić for 1 minute.
Thank you. We hear a lot of accusations from Ukraine, even from its presidents, that we have left them out to hang. And we keep hearing on the other side words of encouragement. But now the West is not doing anything because it does not want to risk the Third World War. Wasn't the same situation with previous cases where Russia intervened in Georgia, and West is prepared only for sanctions. We are ready to sanction the vodka and SWIFT, and to sanction Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky, and all of these things have very little to do with the war. But serious sanctions such as oil and gas, here we are very restricted, and the West continues financing Russia. I also have to mention the latest information that appeared in the US and Chinese media about dozens of biological laboratories in Ukraine directly controlled by the US Ministry of Defense. I would like to have it clarified what is there, what is being developed there, because we do not need another Wuhan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Prime Minister, High Representative, thank you very much for being present with us today. I think that Europe has to emerge stronger from every crisis, and I think that that's what we're seeing after this illegal and barbaric war that Russia has launched against Ukraine. We need a united Europe. We have to defend our own territories, of course, and we have to do that at any price. We need a strong Europe with a strong role, a Europe that intervenes to defend peace. That's why what we need today is a genuine debate about resources for defence, so that we can have common European measures, so that we can protect and defend Europe's borders when they are threatened. Putin has probably thought through a number of different scenarios. He can prevail militarily, but his job is being made very difficult by a Ukrainian resistance. Europe has to have its voice heard loud and clear. We need defense resources to defend the free democratic countries, and to do that with all available means. This war has to be expensive for him.
Thank you, Prime Minister, President. The war led by Russian President Putin marks a turning point in recent European history. Russian aggression has provoked a tectonic shift in the EU, and this is the only good to come out of the tragic events of the past 2 weeks. The EU 27 member states can agree on a position. They can act unified as a geopolitical actor on the world stage. Europe's common foreign and security policy must not remain the weakest link in the chain of European integration. European security cannot be defined outside the EU. The Union must finally take greater responsibility for its security and defense and prevent what happened to Vukovar and Srebrenica. It is high time to increase investment in defense and strengthen strategic autonomy. Europe should be a leader in establishing a new multilateral agenda. Let us use this momentum to turn our ambition into concrete actions. Our citizens' expectations are clear. Strengthening our common defense is a priority for them, and the EP should be included as an equal partner.
Maintenant, Bernard Guetta pour 1 minute.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representative. Putin believed there would be no Ukrainian resistance, and he was mistaken. He thought the 27 member states would not react, and he was wrong. He believed that the Americans would not act, and he was wrong. He believed that the Russians would back him, and he was wrong. He has been wrong on every count, and there is only one last point where we need to prove him wrong. Mr. Putin now needs to understand that our nations are willing to resist him through abandoning use of Russian gas. We need to call on all 27 member states to no longer buy oil or gas and to close Ukrainian skies to Mr. Putin. We need to show the willingness of the EU to resist this war of aggression that threatens all of our continent. It is up to the 27 governments of the member states to see when and how to do this, but knowing that they can count on us for our determination and our support when it comes to the necessary discussions. Thank you.
Next is Bronis Rope for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representatives, colleagues. With Putin waging the war, I hope now we have all learned to listen more attentively to warnings. The Baltic states have long been issuing warnings about the Kremlin's plans. Second, we are still learning, but our reaction to challenges has accelerated, as was shown by speedy activation of sanctions. Third, we have learned that only acting in global partnership with other countries we can achieve tangible results. I hope that now we understand that empty words about the autonomy of the European Union change nothing. We need to act, and our actions should be targeted and quick. Madam Prime Minister, how many chances do we have that the Council will decide on quitting on the fossil from Russia? Thank you.
Madam President, Prime Minister, High Representative, ladies and gentlemen, it is a time of trial a time of responsibility and solidarity of the Union as a whole and the world as a whole. We are confronting an aggressor and we must stop him, and we must support Ukraine because it's about our security in Europe. So it's time to stop the lip service and it's time to act. And we must also mention what we need to do, because it is also our responsibility, the Parliament and the Commission. We cannot allow the situation when Poland, like Estonia, is helping Ukrainians. All families in Poland are receiving the refugees. Poland is being punished, including in this house. And there will be another attempt against to adopt a resolution against Poland today.
For 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Our duty is to help Ukraine because they are suffering an intolerable aggression. And because the principles of the international system must be upheld. Territorial integrity, no invasions are allowed to change borders, the right to self-determination, and third, we believe in solving conflicts through democratic means. So the EU has reacted, but more is needed. Military aid must be sped up. Let's not hesitate. War crimes are being committed. We must help the refugees more and better. We need to stop energy imports from Russia and broaden sanctions. The EU is leading in sanctions against the oligarchs, but that's not enough. Sanctions must also target the bureaucrats and the high echelons of the Russian state. We must extend our pressure to the allies of Putin, those who promote autocracy at our borders and also inside the EU. We have awakened. Let's show that we can be better. Thank you very much.
I give the floor next to Andrzej Halicki for 1 minute.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca.
President, Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, yes, this is a time for a historic test for us because this war concerns us. It's about the future of Europe. This future will be decided in Ukraine. So we cannot be just a little bit on the side of Ukraine and to pay Putin a little bit for arming this terrorist army which is killing, murdering civilians in Ukraine, murdering children. We must show full solidarity and full consistency in our actions, an embargo on gas, coal, oil, because we cannot give even €1 to Putin, who is a terrorist. His place is in The Hague. He should be tried there, and we should show solidarity and unity, because there are helpers, Putin's helpers in this room, who want to weaken the sanctions and dismantle Europe. Future Europe must be safe, so it must be also consistent and show solidarity. Ukrainians need our solidarity. Those mothers, those children need our help. So I call upon you to finance these people. They really need our help. Thank you.
Sir, for 1 minute.
Madam President, Prime Minister, what transpired on the 24th of February was shocking but not surprising. In fact, canaries in the coal mine had been singing about these threats all along. But it was a watershed, and we have changed in those 2 weeks. Now we have to make those changes sustainable. We have to do 6 things. First of all, of course, we have to deny Putin a victory in Ukraine and show to the world that ultimately good triumphs over evil. Secondly, we have to strategically weaken Russian dictatorship. Any threat consists of 2 vectors, the intent to do harm and the ability to do so. We cannot expect to change Putin's evil intent, so we simply have to remove his ability. Thirdly, we have to boost our defences, including defence spending. Fourth, we have to boost our resilience, including the resilience of liberal democracy itself. Fifth, we have to reduce our dependencies on authoritarian countries like Russia in strategic areas. And finally, we have to build alliances. The maxim, together with allies whenever we can, alone only if we really must, is still very much valid, especially in existential crises like this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mixer. Next is Guy Verhofstadt for 1 minute.
So thank you for your leadership, Prime Minister. Let's tell it here in the House. Estonia was one of the first country, if not even the first country, to send weaponry to Ukraine. And you are showing that in these dramatic circumstances, smaller countries in our union count and can lead by example. So thank you very much for that. But for the rest, let's not pat ourselves on the back. The sad reality, dear colleagues, is that we are not doing enough for Ukraine today. A no-fly zone is not on the radar. Our financial sanctions are only targeting 7 banks, Russian banks. That's 30% of the Russian banking sector. And most importantly, there is still no ban on Russian oil and gas. Ukraine is fighting for European values and for our democracies, while we, Europeans, continue to finance the war machine of Putin, the evil. So, in my opinion, it's time that, after the Americans and the British, also we decide on a full temporary ban on Russian oil and gas as long as this aggression is continuing. That is what we need to do. And yes, we will suffer, but we will survive in the coming months. But it is not clear if the Ukrainians will survive in the coming months if we don't take that decision. And we don't need, Mr. Borrell, it's not to you that I'm telling that, it's to the Commission in general, a fantastic strategic paper to lower our dependency to Russian gas. No, that's for later. What we need now is immediate action and a decision on the European level to ban, a temporary ban, until the end of the war of Russian oil and gas.
Thank you very much. I give the floor next to Mr. Brzezinski for 1 minute.
Bardzo dziękuję, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Prime Minister. I'd like to thank for your voice of political realism. We, the citizens of Central Europe, we must speak with a realistic voice. And we are those that have long experience with living with Russia. Russia's always wanted to impose its powers on its neighbors, and therefore this is how it ends. In 2008, the then Polish president said, today Georgia, then Ukraine, and then perhaps Poland, in Western Europe, you said that it was an exaggeration. When we started the building of Gaza port in Świnoujście, Germany said that it was a wrong decision. Today, local authorities in Mecklenburg refuse to accept refugees because they are afraid of their interests. So, if member states continue with this policy, Putin will continue to murder innocent Ukrainians. We may stop Putin with solidarity.
Mureșan for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Prime Minister, welcome back to the European Parliament. 4 points from my side. Firstly, thank you, Prime Minister, for everything that yourself and Estonia has been doing in support of Ukraine. Estonia was one of the first countries to understand the importance of developments in Ukraine, to help Ukraine even before the invasion. I feel that Estonia understands that defending Ukraine means defending Europe. Second point. Prime Minister, I believe you can continue helping us very much by explaining to the world what the Russian Federation is doing. Your insights, the experience of the Estonian people are very important. You have witnessed the provocations of the Russian Federation. You understand their actions better. You know their vulnerabilities. I believe that explaining this to Europe and to the world from your side and the side of the Baltic countries is very important. Thirdly, I also believe that we should stop buying Russian gas, because buying Russian gas means financing Putin's war. It makes us weaker in terms of security. And fourthly, we have to do more together, use the economies of scale. That means that we will make our armies more modern, cheaper, and we will be able to, more modern, more innovative, cheaper, we will be able to do more and better defend ourselves with the same resources. We have to spend more on defense. We should start doing more on security and defense and keep that, because we now understood Russia is a threat and Russia will continue to be a threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muresan. I give the floor next to Kathleen van Brempt for 1 minute. Mrs. President, Mrs. Prime Minister, dear Kaja, can I also first give my deep respect and appreciation for what you do. You come from a very small country, and in this case, a very vulnerable country, and you take sound political leadership in the EU. Thank you very much for that. Beste collega's, de eerste fase van...
Colleagues, the first phase of this war didn't turn out the way Putin expected. The Ukrainian population is more determined than ever, and the Russians are demonstrating on the street. The international community has showed unity, but still the hardest part is still to come. Putin wanted to divide the people in Ukraine and also wanted to break the unity of Europe. So the only answer to this is to stand together shoulder to shoulder in solidarity. And I think we should do this by radically stopping the supply of oil and gas to Europe. And in doing this, we must show solidarity. We need to support Ukraine with money and humanitarian aid, and we have to show the European population that however difficult it may be, we can do it together. Europe will respond with unity, solidarity and trust.
Right, for 1 minute.
Head kolleegid, hea peaminister.
Dear colleagues, dear Prime Minister, I am very happy that it is the Estonian Prime Minister who stands before the European Parliament today. She has done a lot in expressing European principles, but in Ukraine, dozens of children have been killed and hundreds have been injured. The inhabitants of Mariupol and other cities are trapped under Russian bombings. Over 2 million refugees, most of them women with children. All of this is affecting Europe, and all of it will continue as long as Putin's regime keeps up the killing in Ukraine. The refugees need humanitarian corridors now. We need to give Ukraine anything it needs as it defends itself, from aircraft and other weapons to food and medication. European money paid for gas and oil must not end up financing the Russian war machine. The free world can guarantee all of this to help Ukraine push back the aggressor. Putin's regime has bombed itself out of today's Europe. The EU should also reassess its position towards countries that approve of Russia's war in Ukraine. I could see a spot opening up for Ukraine to become a candidate country. For Estonia, being a member of the EU and NATO is a natural state of affairs in the current world. The same opportunity needs to be awarded to other European nations, Ukraine first and foremost, so that we would never again hear a Ukrainian woman escaping her homeland with her children say through tears, "I had no other choice."
Here we give the floor next to Michael Gahler for 1 minute.
Frau Präsidentin,
Madam President, together with many colleagues since 2015, I spoke out against Nord Stream 2. Now, it wasn't just about the issues with Ukraine. I have long spoken out about sending weapons to Ukraine. It's not good to have a weakened country next to Russia. I think what we need to do is to really do everything we can with sanctions to have a full energy boycott. We are seeing carpet bombing as we did in Aleppo or Grozny. I think we have to understand the price is higher energy prices, but I think every citizen can turn down their heating by 2 degrees so we can help stop the dictator in the Kremlin. Slava Ukraini.
Mr. Gale, before I give the floor to the next speaker, I will open the first voting session of today, which will be open until 1:45, and the results will be announced this evening at 7. Nikos Androulakis is next for 1 minute.
Άνοιξη φέτος δεν ήρθε για τα παιδιά της Ουκρανίας.
There's no spring this year for the children of Ukraine. Putin's invasion is an illegal and barbaric act against the whole of humanity. It plunges an entire people into destruction and despair. This takes us back to what we thought was an ugly and distant past. The European states are so committed to their economies that they have underestimated the autocrats like Putin and Erdogan. Tragically, this is a new era that is opening. The Union has to equip itself against these terrible tyrants. The single foreign and defence policy and energy autonomy are top priorities. The idea of a European army, joint armament program, strong economic sanctions, the arms embargo, these are tools that can safeguard our prosperity and borders, from Finland and Estonia to Greece and Cyprus. I do not want Europe to return to militarism, though. We should not allow militarism to return. That is our duty. We have to do everything possible to avoid that.
Thanks, Madam President. Madam Prime Minister, Mr. Borrell, thanks very much, both of you, for your leadership. But let me ask a question, dear colleagues. Are we doing enough to help Ukrainians? The sad answer is no. True, we are arming the Ukrainians. Madam Prime Minister, you talked about the $500 million peace facility. But the truth is that we're spending many more resources arming Putin. Today, every day, we are sending €1 billion to pay for our oil and gas, etc., to Putin. Why? Our leaders tell us that we might fall in a recession if we stop doing that. Come on, dear colleagues, that hypocrisy has to stop. The moral and strategic arguments of not arming our enemies are obvious, but so are the economic arguments. Our economies will suffer much more as a result of slowly escalating and long-lasting war than if we bankrupt Putin now. If we make it impossible for him to pay wages, pensions and the salaries of his military. Prime Minister Kallas, Mr. Borrell, let's bite the bullet now. Not buying Russian gas is bearable for our economies. What is unbearable is continuing to pay for Putin's murders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garicano. I give the floor next to Riho Terras for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Prime Minister. Dear Kaja, thank you very much for being with us in this hemicycle today. And I also want to join the people who have thanked you for your leadership in these very difficult times. I certainly agree with the assumption that we are in this for a long haul. That makes us responsible of making the right decisions today. That demands from us committing adequate resources and building up a European pillar of defence together with NATO. This pillar must not be an oversized construct or an empty buzzword, but well-funded and coordinated effort. Which means, if not today, when then we should reach the 2% of minimum of defence spending in all Europe. But at the moment, we need to act as one to paralyze Putin. Full embargo and the deepest cuts against the aggressor, combined with maximum military support, air defence, planes to Ukraine. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terras. I give the floor next to Mia Petra Kumpula-Natri for 1 minute.
Dear President, and welcome to the European Parliament, the Prime Minister of neighbouring country, dear Kaja. Finland and Estonia, we share the same external border with Russia, the country that brutally alone attacked Ukraine. We share historical memories too. When Sweden now decided to send military equipment to Russia, it was first time since 1939 when they helped Finland in the Winter War. And be sure that we discuss now several proposals to strengthen the Union and strengthen our security, and this is done in the democratic way. New era brutally started on 24th of February by Russia. Our sanctions were not enough and actions were not enough after occupation of Crimea. And now we see attack against democratic rules-based system, against innocent civilians, and 2 past weeks shows we have not put enough sanctions. Attack on Ukraine is not only concern of sovereign state, but horrifying fact that war is in Europe. And the concern is also the whole humanity. It is important to see that crossing the border, breaking the rules also has causes, and ICC is opening investigation on the alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. The EU has been leading now, and transatlantic relations are very important to be so. And, dear President, in this same very room, we will have an opportunity this weekend to build a better, more secure Europe by the citizens and for the citizens when we talk in the future conference.
Thank you, Mia Petra. Thank you. Niels Torvalds is next for 1 minute.
Madam President, High Representative Kallis Kaja, tere tulemast tagasi parlamenti.
Welcome back to the European Parliament, only in a different capacity.
I have had flashbacks from my years as a correspondent in Russia. I covered the first war in Chechnya, and I saw the catastrophic results of a morally decay in the Russian army. And a morally decayed or derailed army is something very, very dangerous. And we see the same political decay inside the walls of Kremlin. Today, with tragic results for Ukraine, for the young men, for the mothers and the children, we see the result of this moral catastrophe. Who wanted this? If you use the words of Yevtushenko's poem, "Хотят ли русские войны?" there is a sentence saying that, "Ask the soldiers under the birches, and their sons will answer, хотят ли русские войны?" The Russians don't want the war. The one who is wanting it is Mr. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Let us make this his last wish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torvalds. I give the floor next to Paolo Rangel for 1 minute.
Dear President, High Representative, Madam Prime Minister, you have just said your mother taught you that saying, "I told you," was rather unpolite. It may be unpolite, and it won't change the past, but it can be very useful. I hope that today everybody in this House And every leader in the European Union has heard you and has listened to your advice, your proposals and your views. Then we won't need anymore to say, I told you. A resposta a dar a
The response that we have to give to Vladimir Putin has to be a clear response. It is high time now for us to stop buying gas and oil from Russia. The next European Council, an informal council, has to take that step. It will mean sacrifices. It will mean economic losses. But it's the only way we can avoid financing Putin's war. It's the only way to avoid financing the destruction of Ukraine. Thank you.
I give the floor next to Rafael Glucksmann for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for your leadership. Monsieur le Haut Représentant, l'avenir de l'Europe se...
The future of Europe will be decided in the ruins of Kharkiv and Mariupol in Odessa. If we do not stop Putin in Ukraine, we will no longer know peace in our continent. We might not intervene militarily, but we can do a lot more than we're doing today. Each day we are financing Putin's war machine to the tune of around 600 million. Our imports of oil and gas allow Putin to destroy schools and hospitals. It is time to put an end to this. Yes, this decision will be costly for our nations, but the member states have a way to mitigate these effects. Whatever it costs, it is worth it for peace and freedom in Europe. If the cost of inaction is high, then I think we can assume that cost. What cost would you be prepared to pay for your freedom and your sovereignty? What is the response we can bring collectively to this? Our answer is dependent on the future of Ukraine.
I give the floor next to Francisco Mianmon for 1 minute.
Gracias, President.
Thank you, Madam President. With the Russian attack on Ukraine, we find ourselves in a new geopolitical situation. Russia has decided to openly become an enemy that ignores our values and launches a war. On our eastern flank, we have a cruel adversary who doesn't accept international law and is threatening to use nuclear weapons. For the European Union, I think the lessons are clear. As well as the need to show solidarity with Ukraine and its citizens, we have 3 clear priorities. First, strengthen seriously our foreign policy and defense policy. We are working on that. Secondly, diversifying our sources of energy resources, drastic reduction of our dependence on Russia. Thirdly, we have to strengthen our relations with the United States, with a administration like Biden's that is much closer and sympathetic to European interests. And we also need to strengthen our links to NATO and partner countries in this multipolar world. A rapprochement between Russia and China could lead us to a bipolar world that pits the free world against Russia and China.
Liana Zhovko for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Prime Minister, dear High Representative. The events in Ukraine have struck us all. The violence is a threat to our European peace, and it is still unclear what the consequences the war will have on our lives. I lived through the war. I know what war means. One thing is certain, the world has changed and the EU has changed with it. Within days, even hours, European member states have shown their unity by condemning the aggression and by taking concrete measures to safeguard our security. Over the last 2 weeks, we have witnessed why European strategic sovereignty is so crucial. The EU is showing that it has the leverage and the power to make proactive policies to reduce its dependency to increase its cooperation with like-minded partners. Although the end game is not yet in sight, let us use this clear momentum to create a real security union. Let us improve our resilience and defense capacity based on strong strategic compass, in cooperation with our transatlantic partners. While managing a crisis today, we should ensure our peace and stability for tomorrow.
Thank you.
And let's work for the peace, because families and those who are fearing for their loved ones only want a peace at this moment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zovko. I give the floor next to François-Xavier Bellamy for 1 minute.
Madame la Présidente, inutile.
Madam President, well, no need to recall all of the statements that we've just heard, but this war affects us broadly and outside these walls. It's not just the freedom and the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people that's threatened here. They deserve our solidarity, but we also need to preserve the principles behind peace in the world. Never should a great nation resolve any of its disagreements by violence. Never should armies attack civilians or bombard targets that have no military relevance, that are rather humanitarian corridors for families escaping the war. This is not naive idealism. It is simply recalling international law. Even war has its rules. Even 1,000 years ago, it was clear that might was not always right. All of the Russian forces involved in this conflict are trying to suggest that might shall prevail, but we all have a conscience. We all have our own responsibility. One day justice will be done, and now we have to question what it means to be a human being. Now in Europe we have to ensure that we defend our principles and be in a position to defend those.
Thank you, President, Prime Minister, colleagues. It was Sir Winston Churchill that said that democracy means that if the doorbell rings at early hours, it is likely to be the milkman. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is not the milkman these days calling at our doorbells, but bombs, missiles, misery and pain. Authoritarian regimes that want to destroy our liberties, our freedoms, our way of life are calling to that doorbell. Make no mistake, we are the main course in Putin's menu. Only through the brave and courageous resistance of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, only through our help to those who fight for democracy and the European ideals in Georgia, in Moldova, in Belarus, the Balkans, and even in Russia, we will prevail. Thanks to them, we might give an opportunity to our children to live the democratic dream. Let's fight outside and inside this European Union the enemies of our liberties. Let's start by cleaning our house of populists and extremists financed by Moscow, Caracas or Tehran. Europe, this is a wake-up call. Let's show the world our desire to have the milkman at our doorstep. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lopez Isturiz. And that brings us back to Prime Minister Kallas. You see that you enjoy full support of this House in the work that we can do together. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you all for this very, very good debate. I think we are very much agreeing on different topics, but I will just point out a few things that I wanted to react to. First of all, we have been very united during this, and as a EU, also with our transatlantic partners, and we should keep it this way. It's going to be tougher because Putin wants to see us divided, and let's not give them this pleasure. Let's stay united. I think it's very important. Second, there were some calls for making agreements regarding the security architecture. The problem is that the goal of Putin or Russia is to get those agreements because he knows that one of the values of the European Union is that we respect agreements. Pacta sunt servanda, which means that we follow the agreements, whereas the Russian side is never going to follow those. So when we talk about, disarmament, or we talk about, taking down military exercises or limiting defense, then it actually means that we are making ourselves weaker because the other side is not going to follow those agreements. And we should not do that. And also, there was also somebody who said here that, expanding NATO, taking new members to NATO would be provoking Russia. Well, it's not provoking Russia. Every country has the right to decide in which union or allies it wants to be. It's not up to any other country to say that you can't be there. And I remind you, NATO is a defense alliance. It's not attacking anybody. It's meant to be there for defending the countries that are in this alliance. And what we see right now, it's very much necessary. So we shouldn't fall into that trap. Regarding the sanctions, I think we also should think about, one side is seizing the assets, but the other side is also confiscating the assets so that we can use the means from those assets to build up Ukraine. And therefore, if this signal goes out, then it also means for every bullet that they fire, for every building that they destroy, they're going to pay for this. They're going to build this from their own money. It's coming from their pockets. I think it has to be very clear regarding this. On energy, we have to understand that it's going to hurt. And of course, Ukrainians are suffering now, and I do agree with those who have said that we shouldn't finance the war machine of Putin. But we also have to understand that some of the countries in Europe are 100% dependent on Russian gas. Bulgaria, for example. If we don't have alternatives, it's going to hurt them a lot, and maybe so much that there is not going to be unity also within Europe. We have to see what are the alternatives, how can we help those countries, so it wouldn't be so hard on our population. Some members said that the EU has emerged stronger from the crisis, and I do agree with this. We have built on the lessons that we learned from the debt crisis that enabled us to be better in the health crisis. We had all the funds ready to be reacting to a possible economic fall, but now we also have to use the lessons learned from previous crises to be stronger, and I do agree we are stronger here as well. And the last point, one more point before the last point, and that is that the representative of EPP from France said that the EC defense clause for Article 42.7 has never been used. That is not correct. It has been used once, and it was for France because of the Bataclan crisis. So just wanted to correct that. And if some countries who are not members of NATO need this article to be really, enforced right now, to feel more secure, like Finland and Sweden, then we should agree on this. I think it's nothing. We are not giving anything away. And the last point. It's about Ukrainian perspective to join Europe. I think what the Ukrainians need right now is hope. They are literally fighting for Europe in Ukraine, and the least we can do is give them this hope and say that, yes, you are part of Europe, you are welcome to our family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Kallas. Thank you to all the colleagues who participated and stayed in this debate until this time. This debate is now closed. We will resume at 3 o'clock with Ms. Bonafé's report on batteries and waste batteries. See you then.